This is a conversation with Siqi Chen. Siqi was previously the chief product officer and then CEO of Sandbox VR, and most recently the CEO of Runway, a fintech company disrupting the business industry. In full transparency, I reached out to Siqi because of his Twitter profile. He has a lot of AI thoughts and predictions that I found super interesting. In this conversation, we review Living Forever, Unbounded Intelligence, and the place that AI has in the school place. Enjoy. One of the things that led me to your background was your Twitter profile, and specifically all the AI tweets you're putting out. Now, they're a mix of philosophy, bold predictions, and really just cool thoughts that I wanted to get your take on. So I'm excited to have a conversation with you today.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, what's different about the space that we're seeing right now, based off of other things that you've seen in your career?
Um, well, with times of great change, there is great opportunity. And this very much reminds me of past times of great change. When Facebook released its first platform, that was very exciting. Lots of people hacking on new products, new ideas. Similar thing happened with mobile. And we're seeing that same energy now. And what excites me about things this time around is I think it's going to be bigger than mobile, than social, than everything that's come before combined. And so there's just never been a better time to be a builder right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually, I wanted to dig into that further. What analogy do you use when you're explaining this to people? So, mobile's one, but any other analogies you use?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think I have a peeve with people using analogies to the current change, right? People compare it to mobile and social and electricity, like I just did. There's even people who compared it to nuclear power, the atom bomb, electricity. And my peeve is actually, I think all of those underrate the magnitude of this one. And the way I like to explain it is this is actually the first meta technology. What I mean by that is if you think about the invention of electricity or the atom bomb or the internet, all of those things were byproducts of intelligence. We've never had the ability to harness intelligence itself. And so that's what makes it such a profound and exciting change, and why any attempt to draw an analogy to what's come before is going to fall short.
Sure. So, we haven't seen the analogy yet, potentially.
No, it's a new thing. It's discontinuous.
Where do you land on the unbounded intelligence side of the house? The AI doomer side, and it's going to get out of hand. How do you think about that?
It's hard to know. I've ambivalent back and forth. I was very much strong doomer initially after reading the scaling hypothesis and thinking about this.
Well, and what time was this?
This is about a year and a half ago when I first encountered the scaling hypothesis from Gorn. And that made a case that we are far closer to AGI than most people expect. That maybe all it takes is just further scaling laws and one or two more algorithmic breakthroughs, which we can get into. Where I am now is if you look at the latest advancements in OpenAI, the idea of using GPT LLMs to understand better the workings of LLM, making it more steerable, more understandable, has given me a bit more confidence in our ability to steer it in the right direction. So I think there is a pretty good case to be made that says maybe it'll be okay. A combination of explainability, understandability, regulation um, will help us get there. The flip side of that is as capabilities increase, as it inevitably will, um, what is going to be the impact of having everyone with a laptop wielding the equivalent of the power of an atom bomb? Hard to say. So I do not know. I am cautiously optimistic. I do generally think, there's an increasing school of thought that says this is not going to happen, that, the doomers are all like religious cultists. I love Mark Andreessen, who's a investor in the last two companies. I think when I hear arguments like that being popularized, my probability of doom goes up. And when people are freaking out about it, my probability of doom goes down. So it very much depends.
Yeah, I think the romantic part is that nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Um, And almost by definition, it's unknowable. You brought up OpenAI and their, well, openness. Some people have criticized in the past saying they should be more open. Some have said, nah, they're doing a great job and they're really taking this super slow. Where do you think they're landing on the scale of what they should be doing?
I think they're making the right moves. Obviously, there's a reason why they're winning and winning by so much. From a doomer perspective, it's very good that they're closed, right? We've seen what even a less capable model, how quickly that can evolve in the wild. But that will also happen too. I think my worry has been okay, if you believe that OpenAI is going to call for regulation, regulate itself, be extremely careful about alignment, which I think it will, and be closed. What also seems to be true is that what's available out in the world open source is maybe a year to 18 months behind. And so, what happens in a world where someone with less scruples than OpenAI just creates and sprints towards a place where the LLM or the intelligence can improve upon itself? I think we're within 5 years of that. And does that then overpower a more cautious organization?
I'm like my mind tries to rush to other mental models or like again analogies to think about. Well, uh, how can I position my argument to even think about this in the first place? But it's hard to grasp in for it. Um, so then hype cycles. You know, you start off super early and then you have a peak of inflated expectations. Those aren't met. And then you go down to the trough of like, this isn't as great as we thought necessarily. And then it kind of evens out to the middle. Where do you think we are in the AI hype cycle right now? Because there's certainly a lot of hype.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I mean, there was certainly a massive spike in hype in the short term. So I would say in the short term, probably overhyped. If you look at a long enough time horizon, I would argue it's probably underhyped. So I think we're in a superposition between the two. There's still a lot of like skepticism around the impact over the long run and how quickly it's going to hit. I think that's pretty underrated. Then, if you look at April and shortly after GPT-4, there's a lot of hype of like, oh, this is amazing. It's going to change everything right now. And I think that's probably overhyped, which I certainly contributed to it. It's a lot of excitement. But my excitement was really like not just about the next few months or few weeks. It's like, it's close. It's here. The fact that we're even talking about it is tremendous, right? Like 5 years ago, everything that's happening is pure science fiction. And we're living in it right now.
I think part of that too is we've only seen the first order impacts of these language models. Like they produce some really, really interesting things, but we haven't yet seen the second order of the companies building on top of them yet to go do some really cool products and productivity. So
Just starting. Yeah, there's a lot too, right? Both the improvements. So there's a second order effect, and then there's the primary effect too of the impact of one, people getting more out of GPT-4 through better superstructures and the models themselves improving and being capable of self-learning through LoRa and improving tool usage. So there's just a lot there. And so, like what is exponential growth? It's just linear increase in the rate of increase, right? And that is what's happening probably super exponentially today.
I was on a Twitter space when GPT-4 just came out, and I forget who the person was, but they said, we haven't even figured out how to use GPT 3.5 yet.
That's
And you
right.
just gave us GPT-4.
That's right. That's right.
That's going to keep on happening. And
Yeah,
it's only going to keep on going quicker as more frameworks come out, as we start to learn these tools better.
that's right.
I want to dig into a fun topic. Those Wes Anderson trailers that came out. So The Matrix in Wes Anderson or Star Wars in Wes Anderson. I found myself almost, I couldn't look away. And they were so fascinating. And just the little details and all the small little things. What do you think it was about those specifically that went so viral, or why did that capture so much attention?
Um, it's I think it's fantasy fulfillment, right? Like I people like Wes Anderson is extremely stylized. It's immediately recognizable. And the idea that you don't have to just like make a joke. Oh, what if Wes Anderson made a Matrix? The idea that, with maybe a few days work and probably a few seconds work in the coming years, If you don't, it doesn't have to be a joke. You can just make it. Not only does you can make the trailer, it'll make the movie. I think it captures a sense of imagination where people look at a movie and, I wish that The Matrix 2 and 3 weren't terrible. And I can just ask for that.
It's almost like fan fiction to the max.
Right. Exactly. It's fan fiction made real, right? And yeah, I think it's both visually evocative, but it also demonstrates the potential of what you can do in expressing your own creativity. And that's going to be something else.
Yeah. Do you think there's a chance we, as in the kind of culture, we could get desensitized to these types of things?
Um, that's really hard to say. Um, on the one hand, I think on some level that's kind of happening. Um, I think a similar argument was made about Photoshop, right? You can't believe pictures anymore. Um, I think there's probably going to be there's a there's a few forces that's going to make it pretty hard to predict the outcome. The first one is, as the technology improves, the fidelity and the creativity of it also improves, right? So you might quickly adjust to the idea of like an AI created Wes Anderson trailer, but as you get adjusted to that, I think the technology is going to improve faster than that. So it's going to be more funny, more creative, higher fidelity, faster. Will you adjust to that? Maybe. So I think that's one part of this. I think the other part of this too is as this evolves, you may get adjusted to the AI creative things, perhaps even if it's good, but then the value of what is authentic increases. So I think that's like from an investment standpoint, what I'm thinking about, like in a terminal AI world, what is valuable? And things that have like provable authentic provenance probably becomes more valuable. Like a chef cooking your food, like a handmade movie, right? The authentic becomes more valuable, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to find the other things fun because of the sheer quality of what can be generated as technology improves. So it's just going to be purely more fun for everyone involved, is probably my expectation.
Sure. And that sounds like a good outcome almost no matter what. But um, let me ask, how do you define authentic? Because the two examples you just gave were almost physical occurrences. What is authenticity in the digital world, or how do you think about it?
So there's this short story called The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. They talk about the authentic. And authentic is like that which a human being without the mediation of machine intelligent technology creates by hand. So a book that is provably written by a person, right? Like perhaps like there is a video live stream of someone just like writing it word by word, right?
Uh,
A movie production. A really good example is actually the how Christopher Nolan uses special effects, right? There is a level of digital effects, but by and large, there is an increasing preference to do practical effects in movie making. People just find it more attractive and appealing, and I think there's going to be a similar movement there. It is like the output of the Butlerian Jihad, which is a reference to Dune, right? The Butlerian Jihad, basically, in a Dune world, basically, there was, for people who don't know, there was a revolution against any kind of machine intelligence. And that is like the setting of the Dune world, which is very science fiction, but there are like no real computers. And everything there is arguably authentic. And so those are the things that I think I would define as authentic.
And I assume there's also a level of trust with it too, because you brought up the part about having a writer. The only reason why you need a video camera to watch him write the book or him or her, is if you don't believe them in the first place, right? And so I
That's
think
right.
that the aspect of human to human connection and the trust with that too will go a long way as well. So you brought up the investment hat that you wear as well.
Hmm.
Besides being authentic, I'm a big fan of Elad Gil's list of moats and defensibility, and he kind of
Hmm.
goes through, your
Yeah.
GTM, your network effects, all that good stuff. What is top of mind for you when it comes to moats and defensibility?
Yeah. Like there's only two that I think, or maybe three that I think are answers I've had to that question. Um, the first one is brand, is a pretty good moat. Mr. Beast has a brand, and I think that's there's a pretty good case to be made that Mr. Beast is going to be one of the most famous and successful, valuable people in the world in the advent of AI. Like, okay, it's like you can now talk to Mr. Beast, or at least an AI incarnation. You have a relationship with all of your fans, and you know that a Mr. Beast video, if created, is authentic. It's him. It's not somebody else. Um, brand is one. Uh, my favorite one is probably relationships. And so a lot of my thinking comes in thinking through what is what is a company's place in a terminal AI world where AGI just exists and you can just conjure up anything? What is a moat in that world? And I think relationships are a moat. And by relationships, I mean, for example, the relationship that Joaquin Phoenix has with her in her, right? Okay, maybe in that world there is OpenAI that is a superior AI, but he's not switching because there's a relationship with that artificial agent that is, what's her name? Black Widow. Scarlett Johansson. Scarlett Johansson. So I think that's a moat. Those are probably like the two more sustainable ones on top of, the usual network effects and customer acquisition. But I think those are probably the two of the more underrated ones in our world today.
When was the last time you watched her with Joaquin Phoenix?
I only watched it once. It's probably 10
Really?
years ago, whenever it came
I,
out.
I need to rewatch it with everything that's going on today and just with new eyes.
It's prescient. It's a prescient movie.
More on the second order effects. The younger generation with
Mm.
education, children interacting with AI. What's your prediction, or how are you thinking about how kids should be interacting with AI, if at all, or anything around that?
Um, I think they should be interacting with AI as soon as possible. Understanding how to speak with it, how to prompt engineer is very useful. And also, it is actually a fairly good educational tool, right? If you can prompt it with right, it's how I learn things. It's extremely educational. When I have extremely technical things explained to me, when I need it not only explained to me but done for me, it's extremely useful. It is like better than the young ladies illustrated primer from Neil Gaiman, right? No, Neil Steve Stevenson, um, by a long shot. And so I've encouraged my own 8-year-old daughter to get ChatGPT, ask it questions, teach her how to use it, and she's like, "This is interesting. This is helpful." So, yeah, it is. It is. We talk about STEM and getting young people to learn how to code. This is better than that. It can write the code for you.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great point. And it must give you peace of mind too, knowing that OpenAI is so strict on, not strict, but so cautious about safety as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Being able to hand over an app with, it's basically, you used to be worried about giving your kids access to Google because they could go search for
yeah.
whatever, but that's not the case here.
But you do have to tell your kids that, hey, not everything is going to say is going to be correct, right? And you need to like do your own research and like look it up because it's going to make things up. But it's good. That's a good and valuable conversation to have with your kids. Don't believe everything a computer is about to tell you, right? That's going to be important, I think, in the future. Don't believe anyone on the face of it, right? You need to like think for yourself. But this is also extremely valuable and increasingly accurate tool.
And what are some of the use cases that your 8-year-old likes to use ChatGPT for?
So she programs in a thing called Scratch. So that's been helpful. She uses it to understand math better. She's like taking like some, at least for a third grader, some like more advanced math, like getting answers to the basic math is pretty helpful. I teach her how to like how she can use ChatGPT to teach her things, right? So explaining by analogy, explaining like I'm an 8-year-old because she is an 8-year-old. So when she's stuck on something, being able to formulate the right questions, and it's all fairly helpful to her.
Yeah, that's cool. Has there been a response from the school about what place ChatGPT has in education?
That I haven't heard um, yet. I mean, she's in the third grade, so there's not a whole lot of worry about it. But I mean, in general, if a school is like, don't use ChatGPT, that is like the wrong response, right? It's the equivalent of like, not, don't use calculators. You should use calculators. You should also know how to add. And this is something where it's not just a calculator, it can teach you how to add or divide and how it works. And so, what I think a much more effective way of educating, this is going to exist. People are going to use it, and you should teach people how to get the most out of it. So they're not just relying on it, but making their own faculties and skills and knowledge a lot more better.
Sure. Do you think that the current education system, the way it's set up, is ready for this new type of calculator for students to have?
I don't know. I'm not super well educated on that topic. Generally, there's been resistance, but we live in Silicon Valley, and I think there's a lot more openness to new technologies like this. But like you said, there are second order effects, and we're barely seeing the impact of that. And I think the effects are going to be fairly dramatic fairly quickly. Right now, it's a fun chat tool, and you can talk to it. What happens? One of my main questions and opportunities around AI is that probably the biggest bottleneck in its impact is the fact that for most use cases, especially if you're using ChatGPT, it requires you to initiate the conversation. And so a lot of the bottleneck is just remembering that you can initiate a conversation as opposed to going to Google or just trying to figure out yourself, just initiating a conversation. And so that's how a student would use it, right? Oh, I have a question. I got to remember how to talk to ChatGPT. So it's going to be very impactful and interesting across a wide domain of use cases when that flips. What happens when ChatGPT or its equivalent is able to talk to you proactively and explain things to you right when you need it? I think that's going to be highly disruptive to many, many domains, especially education. And I don't think we're ready for that.
Yeah, it's making me think of almost like Copilot functionality, where in Copilot you don't need to really prompt it to give you something. It's just going to kind of show you a shadow of what it could do all over the place. So I wonder what the Copilot metaphor or analogy looks like around the other parts of your life.
Yeah, right. Copilot for your entire life,
You
right?
know, you're reading an email
Yeah.
from Greg, and then it notices that you go to your calendar, and it notices the words in there, and it kind of autofill. Maybe it autofills for you. Who knows? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's multiple companies working on that. I think Rewind is well positioned to be a platform for that. But yeah, that's where things are going, right? Like the startup that I wish someone would do, and I know there's probably 20 startups working on this, is, Runway is at a place where I no longer can keep up with everything that's happening in the company. And we also record every meeting, and we have email traffic and Slack traffic and project manager traffic and comments in Figma. And AI could like take a look and be omniscient about everything that's happening in the company and tell me what is the most important, right? That's just an enterprise use case, but you can imagine that for every other aspect of your life. We're just scratching the surface of all of this. And I think proactivity and changing the interaction model is going to be a pretty large change.
I found that from a practitioner standpoint, as I've come across problems like that, understanding what's important and telling and try to instruct the definition of importance has actually been more difficult than I would imagine to, because that's almost very human to understand. Instructing a machine, it's been difficult.
Yeah, my own hypothesis on that is like, yeah, there is some element of understanding capability that's, GPT-4 isn't still quite there yet.
Hmm.
What it has context is about everything else in the world on a broad basis, but what's missing is context specific to you. And that's going to require a combination of you just need to integrate it with a lot of data, and you need to give it more data than what's available, right? Like, I think maybe 60% of the things it needs to know about you is somewhere in the cloud, but 40% of it is something you need to tell it. And that's still going to be challenging, but it's a humongous opportunity. Again, barely scratching the surface of.
Yeah, one of the paradigms I'm seeing other products do is as you interact with it, it'll have a scratch pad about your preferences. So this is
Mm,
Greg's phone number, this is Greg's email, this is Greg's favorite ice
yeah,
cream or whatever. So it'll be
yeah,
interesting to see what an AI can pick up about us passively and how much watching our behavior it needs to do before it understands us pretty well.
right.
It's
Yeah.
almost like you remember that Rochambeau automatic game, or I know it was the even odd automatic game, and you would input you would click a couple random numbers or a couple random selections, and then something after like 10 turns, the AI would predict with like 90% accuracy the next move that you were going to do. So we may be a bit more predictable than we actually think.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I want to bring up one of my favorite tweets that you had talked about recently, and I told my wife this, and she was almost didn't even entertain me. Living forever. So your tweet had said, if things continue the same way that we think it's going to go, anybody underneath the retirement age today will have the choice to be able to live forever or not.
It's interesting, out of all of like the sort of predictions people have, of that one, I'm probably the most certain of. That feels like the least controversial one. That feels like just mathematical almost in my head. Um, and so, you just have to believe a few things. One is like, longevity is a physical world problem. It is solvable. It does not violate in a meaningful way the laws of physics. So you take that as one given. And then you need to think about, okay, at what point do you have AGI ASI? Right now, the consensus estimate on metacalculus is like 2035, right? And by the way, that estimate has been falling by like decades, years, every single month, every single year for the past 20 years. So if anything, it's probably going to come sooner than that. But let's say it's 2050, right? Like, okay, given where we are today, in 25 years, do we think we're going to have AI that is smart enough to improve itself? I, yeah, that seems fairly certain to me. So, in that world, what is unknown is, are we able to control it? Doomers say we can't, or we're going to have to work really hard to do it. And the acceleration says, yeah, it's going to happen anyway. It's going to be great. So either doomers are right and we're all dead, or the accelerationists are right and death is solved and we're all going to live forever.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with that with that logic. So say you're presented with the choice. Which pill are you taking?
Ever watched The Good Place?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Not to spoil anything, but yeah, like basically people live forever. And at some point after living forever for like a trillion years, you're bored and you go to the next place and you kind of off yourself and find out what happens. I'm in that camp, like I remember Aubrey de Grey in a TED talk. People were talking about solving death and how some people have an ethical issue with like solving death. And his response to this is like a huge ethical issue. And like, why is solving death a good thing? Because and his answer was because death kills people.
uh,
I'm like, that's a pretty good argument, right? Like, no one thinks murder is good. Death is the thing that kills people. It's like, yeah, so it's bad and it should be solved. And it's like, that's a pretty simple ethical argument for why it is a good thing to work on. And people should have the right to die too.
yeah. You want to talk about second order effects? I mean, that is going to be
That,
massive.
yeah, that's why it goes back to my point. Like, short term, maybe overhyped, long term, that. It's like, how do you overhype that?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking the entire world right now or has been living with the expectation that they're going to die eventually. There'll be a class of people who will wake up, be born, and not have that expectation. And the way that they think about life and the goals and objectives and how they choose to live it, I can't even begin to think where that's going to go. What other controversial thoughts do you have that others may disagree with you on?
Um, a lot. I'm not willing to say publicly. Specific to AI. Yeah, I think we talked about most of them. The biggest one was like the idea of analogies. Um, I have one. So this is one we haven't talked about. It speaks to the impact of AI. And so there is a school of thought that says like AI is going to be great for creativity, because it's going to be this amazingly useful, fun, friendly tool for thought and tool for expression. Right. If you're a writer, it'll make you a better writer. If you're an engineer, better engineer, artist, better artist. I think, and so in that world, human creativity, human input becomes more valuable. And I think my issue with that is that that is true in the midterm, but over the long run, what it ignores is it's going to be funnier than you. It's going to be more creative than you once it's out in the world and it can think. And I think we dramatically underestimate what happens then. As funny as a creative director you will be when you use AI to write jokes or create art, what happens if AI is better? And I think people don't really like to talk about it. But I think that is, to me, fairly inevitable, that it's going to have more feelings than you, that it's going to know more than you. And I don't think we're really mentally prepared for a world like that. It's all fun and games. It's going to be a great tool and it's going to be helpful for now, but what happens after?
It's very parochial to think that humans will always be looking down on the rest of the technology and the other species. We've never had to look up. I was reading a deck, which was a presentation by somebody I really should attribute. I'll put it in the show notes. But they had said that scientists had created AGI on a Thursday, but they made a laughing, like a comedy AGI. It wasn't very funny on Thursday. It improved itself overnight. It was pretty good on Friday, but it still wasn't that great. So they left it over the weekend. And on Monday, it was 10,000 times funnier than any human who had ever lived. And the scientists, upon immediately hearing the joke, they died of laughter because it was incomprehensibly funny that their mind broke and they just died. And that was actually the destruction of Earth because people heard these jokes and they just immediately keeled over.
I got to read that. That's so good.
I'll send it to you over, but it was quite long, but there was a lot of really interesting predictions on there as well. Another analogy I loved was this author said, we don't know how intelligence is going to be. And the example he gave was Stephen Hawking's cat. He goes, Stephen Hawking is an incredible scientist, incredibly smart, can, talk about black holes and all that. But if Stephen Hawking wants to get his cat inside of a box, he can't do it. He wouldn't even, he cannot coerce his cat to get inside the box. He goes, that could be what superintelligence is going to be like.
Yeah.
Or it could be like Einstein intelligence, where Einstein is incredibly smart, but if he wants to get his cat inside the box and the cat isn't going, Einstein's going to pick up the cat and stuff in the box. And he goes, we don't know what type of intelligence AGI it could be. It could be one of the two.
I think that's right.
Yeah, who knows? But I'll send it to you after. Send you that link to that one.
Interesting.
Anything else, or any other hot takes, or anything else you want to cover here while we got the mic open for it?
Well, in the short term, it is going to be the most fun 5 years that we've ever experienced in technology. And so, I'm of the camp of build and enjoy it and have a lot of fun while we're doing it.
So if you're an entrepreneur or developer or an indie hacker or somebody who's not currently participating in the space, what's the way that you would recommend getting started?
Get started. There's no replacement for just going. Ask ChatGPT how to get started. It's going to have really good answers for you. I wrote a Notion bot. This is inspired by John Cutler. This idea of how do you get ChatGPT to talk to you, and we have a Notion bot that now will comment on any Notion document in the voice of anyone you want. It's called Jam Session. At Jam Session with Steve Jobs, and they'll just comment on your Notion docs. It's excerpt comments, and it's here's what Steve Jobs would have done. And you can get started. It's never been easier to get started. AI will help you get started. There's a lot that you can do. So just go.
Just go. Awesome, Siqi. Well, thank you very much for all that you share on Twitter as well. It's really fun to see your thoughts, your projects, your philosophies, your predictions, and I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Thank you. I'll do more of it.
Sounds good. We'll see you later.
See you.